Hello everybody and welcome to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode I'm joined by Jay Martin, the host of The Jay Martin Show and the host of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. We're going to be discussing Justin Trudeau's recent resignation from the post of Prime Minister. What does it mean for Canada's future? And what would the rise of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party mean for Canada's natural resource industry, metals and mining, as well as oil and gas? We're going to talk about where he's currently seeing value in the commodities markets, his thoughts on gold and silver for 2025, and a whole lot more. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Jay Martin. Jay Martin, welcome back to Commodity Culture. I want to start our conversation off with the same question I ask every guest on the show, and that is, what are the main themes and trends you're currently watching when it comes to markets and the economy that you think more investors should be paying attention to today?
Yeah, certainly. Jesse, it's great to see you, man. Thanks for having me back. For me, it's pretty clear right now, Jesse. I'm seeing a beautiful realization that's making headlines, that people are beginning to understand the impact of monetary and fiscal policy in a way that I've never seen it discussed before. And we're seeing business leaders throughout the US, we're seeing politicians in Canada, but all over the world begin to demonize the devaluation of currency. Now, the reason this is striking to me and really important is because it's no shocker, like the last 4 or 5 years have been pretty volatile from a civil unrest standpoint. But you can go back obviously further than that to like 2010, maybe when we saw the first expressions like Occupy Wall Street on the left and the Tea Party on the right. And then we had, Trump and the defund the police, and we had various expressions that just escalated in volume, right? Antifa, QAnon. But this is like Empire Cycle 101. When we see this escalation of civil unrest on the heels of rising populism, and two groups begin to point the finger and essentially duke it out in the public arena. We see this whenever a poor country becomes rich, and then that rich country has living standard expectations that go up. And so the people demand more pay. And the corporations say, in order to keep costs down, we're going to export our labor to cheaper economies to keep prices down. And that hollows out the middle and lower classes. But the country's wealthy now, so the government can step in and provide entitlements and subsidies to keep everybody's living standards up. But when you export your income and increase your expenses, you can only keep that going for so long. And eventually that empire, whether it was the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, and now the Americans, begin printing money at crazy scale. And obviously what happens there is that you devalue the currency, so everything becomes more expensive, and the gap between the have assets and the not having assets increases, right? And people wake up at 35 years old and they say, I worked really hard. I don't know what happened. The house I couldn't afford last year is somehow less affordable this year. Somebody must have cheated, and they start pointing the finger, right? And that is what we're seeing now. We've watched that escalate for the last 15 years. Really closely. Now let me bring it back to the headline that I'm focused on. Finally, because nobody follows monetary policy. Very few people pay attention, right? And you're not taught the language of money in school. And so all the lived experience is that I'm either getting wealthier because I own assets, therefore I must be smart, or I'm getting poorer because I don't own assets, so therefore they must have cheated. And you see this interfighting back and forth. And if you point the finger at me and call me the enemy, chances are I'm going to point it back at you and say, no, you are, right? You're greedy and corrupt. No, you're lazy and entitled. I mean, this is the argument that is populism. But today we're seeing, whether it's the opposition leader in Canada, Pierre Poilievre, business leaders like Elon Musk, United States, we're seeing this spread globally, though. People in positions of power are beginning to at least put the crosshairs on devaluation of the currency. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be front and center. I don't think it's necessarily fixable in the way we wish it was, but it is encouraging people to think with a bit more common sense about how they organize their wealth and their net worth. And I think the validation of this is that Gold is hitting all-time highs. Bitcoin's hitting all-time highs. The population en masse, different generations do different things, is looking for safe havens outside of the devalued measuring stick, which is what's really occurring, right? And so that's a major trend that I think is just getting started. And the metrics that would validate that thesis for me are the two sort of present day favorites in off-grid assets, which would be gold and Bitcoin. But I think it's got a lot more direction to go, and so makes me bullish on the commodity sector. But that's the nutshell.
Hey guys, just a quick break to hear from today's sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They offer personalized service and competitive prices with no minimum purchase for silver, gold, platinum, or osmium. Here's just some of the comments left on this YouTube channel about ARC SGO and owner Ian Everard. Have bought from ARC, good source and price. I cannot say enough good about Ian and his company. He is the most honest individual I could find in order to buy precious metals. If you are looking to buy precious metals, I recommend Ian at ARC Silver. He is a straight shooter. So go to arcsgo.com and contact Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. Well, let's talk about politics in Canada, because obviously we've just had Justin Trudeau resign from the position of Prime Minister once they find a replacement for him. Now, it's interesting because the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, which is coming up January 19th and 20th, I'll be there, Jay will be there. Tickets are free, so there'll be a link in the description below. Ton of great speakers, etc. But it's funny because you build it as a farewell party for Justin Trudeau before he resigned, which I thought was pretty funny. And now it looks like that's actually become a reality. So first off, I wonder what your thoughts are on Trudeau's resignation. And do you think this is good, bad, or neutral for Pierre Poilievre's chances, saying they put somebody like Mark Carney in Trudeau's spot to run for prime minister moving forward?
Yeah, that's like the most important question. And I think that's largely missed on many people right now. We're celebrating the resignation of Trudeau like this is the win. We finally got rid of him. But you need to think about this differently. You need to think about it like this is exactly what happened after the Biden-Trump debate. The Democratic Party realized their candidate had no chance and they needed to swap. And so they put Kamala in that seat, put an aggressive rebranding campaign on her name and thought, let's run this candidate instead. Now, it didn't work, right, obviously, but I think it's safe to say that Harris did present a much greater threat than Biden did to Trump. He was still able to defeat her. That's great. That's exactly what is happening right now in Canada. So Trudeau has resigned. The Liberal Party will choose a new leader. And clearly, they're looking at the polls the same as everybody else is and saying, Trudeau has no chance at beating anybody in the next election. So if we, the Liberal Party, want to hold on to power, we need a new candidate. And so that's what Trudeau's been coerced out of the seat. They'll find somebody else. I know there's a handful that have raised their hand. Mark Carney seems to be the front runner right now. And I think, to be honest, Jesse, I think Carney's a much bigger threat than Harris was because this is a guy who can say, look, I was the governor of the Bank of Canada in 2008. Like, I got us through the GFC with a healthier balance sheet than any other G7 nation. And those are factually true statements. Now, I would say the reason we got through the GFC so clean was because of what we did in 2005, 6, and 7, not what he did when he came to the seat in 2008 through to 2013. But people don't look into details. They hear the headline and they believe it, And so here's a guy who can say, I was the governor of the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank of England. Nobody understands fiscal and monetary policy like I do. I will balance the budget. I will clean up this mess. It's a compelling argument. I think it's bad news for Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the opposition, because now he's making headlines all over the world right now, and I think that's adding a lot of pressure to the Canadian population. But the Conservatives in Canada have a tougher fight than Republicans in the United States because we have more parties up here, and there's a party called the People's Party run by a gentleman named Maxime Bernier. And they're the most libertarian, most conservative party in Canada. And so generally speaking, liberals will vote liberal, but conservatives will vote People's Party or conservative. And so there's a bit of dilution in the conservative vote, which is another threat to Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party. So I'm optimistic, but I wouldn't say it's definitely not a time for conservatives to celebrate yet. It's the opposite of that. It's time to get organized and take this threat seriously.
Yeah, interesting comments on the PPC. I see a lot of people online proclaiming, one of two things. One, you're going to split the vote if you vote for the PPC, or, the Conservative Party aren't real conservatives. You're just a shill if you vote for them. Pierre's a globalist, tool. He's being controlled by, name your pick, the World Economic Forum or whoever. So that's kind of an interesting point. It would be very powerful if somehow both of those parties could join together and then bring all of the PPC voters over to the Conservatives, and then maybe bring a more libertarian, more true conservative angle to the Conservative Party. I don't know that that's going to happen, but that's a very good point. Now, the Liberal Party has been trying to curb oil and gas production in the province, in the country. Obviously, we infamously saw Trudeau not too long ago rejecting, the Prime Minister of Japan asking to buy natural gas. I believe Germany also wanted to buy natural gas from Canada. He said he couldn't see a business case for it, which is completely insane. They're putting all sorts of emissions curbs. They basically feel like they want to take the very far left radical environmentalist approach to trying to manage the oil and gas sector. Now that Trudeau stepped down, obviously the battle's not won yet, but assuming that Poilievre and the Conservatives are able to win the next election, do you think all that's going to come to an end and we're going to see, these oil and gas production tapped into to boost the economy?
Yes, I do. I think having an Albertan come back to the leadership, reminiscent of Stephen Harper, back in his tenure. They understand the energy and extraction industries. And more importantly, Jesse, I think what it comes down to is understanding your strengths, right? Whatever, you're an investor, play to your strengths. You're a business owner, play to your strengths. You're an athlete, do the same thing. Canada is a massive country. We're larger than the United States, but there's only 40 million people here. We're on par with a state in the US, right? It's a huge country with almost nobody in it. But in terms of global production, we're top 5 for oil, we're top 5 for gas, we're top 5 for nickel, top 5 for lithium, top 5 for uranium, top 5 for diamonds. And, we produce and export 25% of the world's potash, a fertilizer that anybody needs if you want to grow food, 30% of the world's softwood lumber. This country is amazingly productive, but we have to play to those strengths. Having a prime minister who declined a natural gas deal to a customer who was willing to pay distressed prices because they were desperate, and say, instead, we can get you hydrogen power, of which we don't have any, but we might 10, 20 years down the road, right? And then saying we're going to subsidize the EV industry in Canada. That's not what we do here, right? We're very good at very specific things. That policy is the equivalent of the Chicago Bulls in 1996, and the coach walks into the locker room and says, "Look, guys, you got a lot of potential here, but we're going to be a soccer team now, all right?" And everyone's like, "We play basketball really, really well." No. Soccer's huge in Europe. We're going to be a soccer team now. We're going to figure it out, right? And it's no, Jordan plays basketball. That's what he does. This is what we do, right? We have phenomenal expertise and natural resources, and expertise in extracting those natural resources. But it hasn't been leveraged. And I would say that Canada is arguably the wealthiest country in the world on a per capita basis. The issue is that wealth is stored beneath the surface. And when we have federal leadership who understands their role is to do nothing but clear the path for provinces to conduct business and take their product to market as they want to, then we realize our potential. But when we have federal leadership who's playing these weird virtue signaling games and narratives that have zero substance or promise in reality, we end up where we are today, which is 10 years of suppression of the economy, and everyone's paying the price for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously, I left Canada in October of 2021, never looked back. One of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I feel like far left ideology has caused so much damage to Canada over the years, whether we're talking economically, socially, even spiritually in many ways. In your view, even with a conservative victory at the next election, do you think things can be turned around in a meaningful way? Because obviously inflation is something that can't really be put back into the bottle. The cost of living in Canada is way too high. Taxes are way too high. The medical system is broken in many provinces, BC being chief among them. Can these problems be fixed under a new leadership, or are these systemic issues that could take a decade or more to actually resolve?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to the public. That's what I believe. It's how do we act at the next election? I think it's very consequential. And you can mess up a really good thing. I mean, look at a country like Argentina is a great example, right? When people think about Argentina, they generally think about a bit of a basket case economy because of their recent history. But if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the term the rich Argentinian was like a globally recognized phrase. And this economy was built on like aggressive European immigration and a commodity export economy, right? Massive in agriculture. They got hit really hard by the Great Depression. And instead of recovering in the way some countries did, they went full populist, which matured into socialism. And then they bounced between socialist and military rule for the next 90 years, right? And so you gotta that I think about that because that was an economy that had all the promise in the world and the natural resources to support it, but they still became a socialist backwater for 90 years. They're now getting their feet back under them, right? And so they're turning it around, but it took nearly a century. It was a lost century of Argentinian economic activity. So do I think that could happen to Canada? Yeah, you can mess up a really good thing. Absolutely, you can. And I don't think that should be taken lightly or that we should take our prosperous future for granted because you can look around the globe and find more examples of that where opportunities are squandered and it can take a long time to recover those. Now, if we have some advantages, it would be that we border on, the most powerful and wealthy country in the world, and we tend to emulate their trends to a certain degree. And I think the election of President Trump may influence Canada in a positive way, but I'm just going to be honest, it could have the opposite effect. Canada's a lot more liberal. Our Canadian version of Trump would be like a Kevin O'Leary. He tried running 5-6 years ago and it lasted for about a week, right? Canada had no palate for him. Now, a lot's changed in that 5 to 6 years, but I could see an aversion to conservatism in response to Canadians who wouldn't have voted for Trump, and that dictates how they vote in the future. I think that's a real threat. Now, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm still here in Canada raising my boys here because I believe that Canada has potential and that we will realize it. And quite frankly, if you had invested in Argentina on the day that Milei was elected, it was a very smart bet. And there's a very real possibility that that is Canada on the day that Polyev gets elected, is that Canada suddenly becomes the smartest bet in the game. I think that's also a possibility. So these are the outcomes, and I think it's a fine balance, Jesse. I do.
Vancouver is the hub of junior mining for basically the whole planet. And you've been there for a long time. You have a lot of connections with CEOs of various mining companies. I'm wondering what you're hearing these days when it comes to sentiment, when it comes to challenges that these companies are facing. We obviously know about the fact that we look at gold ripping to new all-time highs, and there's a massive valuation gap between gold and the miners, particularly when it comes to the juniors. Normally they're a leveraged play on the gold price, and it's not really turning out that way. What are you hearing from people in the space about the state of the industry at present?
Yeah, that comment you just made, I think is very accurate, and it's causing investors a lot of frustration right now. The gold price is ripping. Why aren't the equities following suit? And my belief is that investor behavior and human nature has not changed and is the same during every trend and investment cycle. When you see the underlying asset or the pillar asset begin to rise in price, all the up-and-comers eventually get caught as well. Meaning, like, look at every Bitcoin rally that we've seen, right? Bitcoin takes off, and then all the other altcoins, eventually people start piling in to try to bet on the what might be next scenario, right? We've seen the same in AI. We've seen the same in various tech trends over the last 12 years. And that is how every mining cycle has matured as well. The underlying commodity rips in price, and eventually investors take enough notice. They believe that easy money's been made on the asset itself or the major producing companies, and they start looking for the what might be next opportunity. And that's how capital gets distributed to the lower realms. Now, timing that's impossible. And yeah, it takes investors a lot of patience. But I would say that is the makeup of every emerging investment trend, not mining, every emerging investment trend. One leader takes off and then people look for the what's next scenarios, and that will occur as well in the precious metal sector. When that is, I don't know. Right now, prices are favorable. That should be a good thing. But timing, it's impossible. It does take patience.
So when it comes to the commodities sector, you've spoken about gold. I'm wondering where else you're currently seeing opportunity, because you did mention that you think that you are bullish on the commodities sector as a whole. Are you looking at base metals, uranium, oil and gas? Is it across the board? Where are you seeing the most value right now?
Yeah, right. So I'm watching the copper sector right now. I know a lot of people are. Look, when I think about copper and I think about the forecasts, you hear a lot of conversations about the demand that's going to come from more EV adoption or AI demands on infrastructure or renewable energy infrastructure, and how that's going to create this massive surge in copper demand. And some forecasts say we're going to double demand in the next 10 years, right? Up to 50 million metric tons per year by 2035. And the other side of that would be, yes, but we're maybe heading towards some kind of a globally coordinated recession. And in that scenario, demand gets crushed. So all these forecasts need to be thrown out. Now, I make a habit of not spending too much time predicting the future, but we can look at the past and then extrapolate from that. I find that to be a much more useful exercise. And taking copper as an example, we could look at the last 50 years of copper supply and demand. It tells us a lot, because you can go back to 1970, 80, 1990, 2000, 2010. Back in 1970, we were consuming about 2 to 3 million metric tons of copper on average. And every decade, we increased that by about 4 to 6 million metric tons, all the way until today, 24-ish million metric tons. Now, what's really important about that is that trajectory has been incredibly consistent, decade average, decade over decade, since 1970, 80, 90, 2000, 2010, 2020. We've added about 4 to 6 million metric tons per decade. Inside that 50 years, we've seen everything that we talk about what might happen in the future. We've seen massive technological innovation. We saw the dawn of the internet, of personal computers, smart technology, cell phones. We saw all that. So any of that massive innovation burst that's going to cause increased demand, that happened in the last 50 years. We also saw massive recessions. We saw 1987. We saw the dot-com bust. We saw the 2008 GFC. And despite all of those events, both to the upside and the downside, the trajectory of demand was very consistent. And so that's what I would lean on. We're not going to double. It's of my view, we're not going to double demand in the next 50 years. We're going to keep increasing on the same trajectory that we have for the last 50 years. Which is bullish, because you can look at the production numbers during those same decades, and they were right in step with demand. 1970, we needed 3 to 4 million metric tons. That's what we produced. Same thing in 1980, 90, 2000. And then 2010, around 19 million metric tons in production, we just kind of flatlined. We stopped investing, right? And by 2015, that spread was like 22 in demand and again, 19 in production. 2024, 2025 now, we're demanding about 24, 25 million metric tons, but production's still down there at 19. It hasn't moved, right, in the last 15 years. And that's not going to maintain. That's actually going to decrease, because we've depleted the mines that we already have. We haven't invested in new ones. And so that's my base case. That mouth is beginning to open up, right? And that does not factor in any sensational might happens, right? I believe that's just a very pragmatic reflection on 50 years of history and assuming that not much is going to change in the future. And so, if copper's the pillar, that's where I go. And I like the uranium sector a lot right now. I think that, again, globally, we are recognizing that the return on investment in renewable energy is just not there yet. And we have never made an energy transition in order to do the right thing for the planet or people. I'd love to say we do, but we don't. We're pragmatic animals, and we move when the economics make sense. And nuclear right now is where the economics absolutely make sense. And that's why you're seeing governments begin to try to figure it out, and you're seeing corporations like Google, Amazon, Tesla begin to invest directly. When it comes to the uranium sector, like I'd stick with producers. I like companies that have the asset, not necessarily looking for the asset they might find one day. So copper, uranium, gold, silver, that's got most of my attention right now.
Well, let's talk about gold and silver for a moment then. What do you think are some of the catalysts that could drive prices higher? Could we potentially be overbought when it comes to gold? And obviously the silver story is one that's persistently being called the most undervalued metal on the planet for several years in a row now. I mean, a lot of people got into the silver space with the whole silver squeeze movement when it was already close to $30, not really realizing that it has already gone up a lot before that point. But if we go back, I think it's been 13 years, not too long ago, the silver price closed on a monthly basis, the same that it did 14 years ago. So while that is a historic moment in terms of market history, it's also pretty disappointing to people who've been holding silver since 13 years ago that they're just now starting to break even. So there's different ways of looking at it depending where you entered the market. But there's this whole hyperbole surrounding silver. So I'd love to get your thoughts on catalysts for both metals. And is silver really as undervalued as people think it is?
Great question. So on the gold front, I think, again, what you need to look at is the measuring stick, right? I mean, that's what changed. An ounce of gold is the same rock it was, right, 100 years ago. It hasn't changed. The values changed in terms of the measuring stick that we use. You touched on inflation earlier and whether or not we have the ability to actually curb it. You can look at American debt at like 34 trillion or whatever it is today, but the off-balance sheet liabilities in the U.S. surpass 100 trillion. So that is future promises to pay that we are already committed to, right? This is entitlements. This is Social Security. This money's been promised. We don't have it. The only way we're going to meet those nominal demands is by printing the currency. And that's how we'll facilitate that. And so I think money expansion is about the only guarantee for the balance of this decade. And in response to that, I expect two things to happen. Both the value of gold in terms of that measuring stick will continue to go up because we're going to devalue the measuring stick. And every other currency is going to do the exact same thing. I think the U.S. will probably be the strongest as it is today. But secondly, everybody's watching this show, right? And that's why we're seeing central banks all around the world start stockpiling gold at a faster rate than they have in 50 years. And I wouldn't say it's because they're abandoning the US dollar or they think the US dollar's, in its final sunset years. I think it's just you go to the safe haven asset when you don't know what's around the corner. It's just a good place to be. I mean, any investor who's paying attention right now, I think, has built a larger insurance policy than maybe they had 10 years ago, right? Whether you're looking at the consolidation in the S&P, the crazy valuations of these stocks, the chaos and volatility that's defined the first 5 years of this decade, that's probably going to continue for the next 5. You probably built a bigger insurance policy. And for you, maybe that's real estate. For someone else, maybe that's gold. I'm not sure. But central banks have the same, responsibility over their countries that you and I have over our households. And so they're making the same bet. That's all they're doing. They're just building a bit of an insurance policy right now. And I think that trend will continue as that narrative becomes more commonly held. And I think it is. We started this conversation talking about how devaluation of currency is finally front and center in political and corporate conversations. And, people are beginning to understand they need to exit themselves as much as they can to protect their purchasing power from fiat currencies. And so I think that trend will continue. Central banks won't slow down, but more individuals like you and I will pick up on that narrative, follow suit to protect their purchasing power. And that's my primary case for the gold price. There's no guarantee that I feel as strongly about as I do further money expansion in a very big way the rest of this decade. So when it comes to silver, I mean, there's a handful of cases you could make for silver, whether monetary or industrial. To really simplify, Jesse, I would just say that whenever we see a gold price take off, silver usually trails and then outperforms massively. There's this slingshot effect. And I might say it's as simple as investors looking for that what's next opportunity. It's a smaller asset class. It's much more volatile. There's fewer companies to choose from. There's lots of explorers that, yes, they're cheap right now, but that silver slingshot is something we've seen dozens of times in the past. When gold rips, silver follows suit later, but more aggressively.
Well, Jay, this has been a fantastic conversation. Could you tell us about the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, how people can get tickets, and also the Jay Martin Show?
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, I'm glad you're going to be there live on stage like many times, hosting a bunch of content with me. It's going to be super fun. This year's agenda, Jesse, is like, I say this every year, the agenda is going to be amazing. This year, we really went all out. And so I organized the content of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference into 3 buckets, I would say that. So we have geopolitics at the top. I think geopolitics matters today more than ever for commodity investors as new trade alliances are being formed, new adversaries are being made on the global stage, and this will continue to affect the supply of the materials we need. So having a decent grasp of geopolitics is important. And so to cover that, I've invited individuals like Colonel Douglas McGregor, Dr. Pippa Malmgren, Dr. Pascal Lota at Neutrality Studies, great individuals who they do an amazing job at pulling apart the threads of these complex conflicts that we're seeing around the world and get into the underlying incentive. What do the stakeholders really want in Syria? What do the stakeholders really want in Iran, in Ukraine, et cetera? So we cover geopolitics in a big way. And then we go one layer down into macroeconomics and finance. And for that, you'll find individuals like Robert Kiyosaki, Danielle DiMartino Booth, David Rosenberg, Frank Giustra, Grant Williams, and individuals like that who cover the macro picture extraordinarily well. Again, I try to pick people who do a great job at making complex things very simple and, most importantly, actionable. And then the third bucket is we get right into capital allocation in the metals and mining sector. And this is where you'll find individuals like Rick Rule, like Ross Beatty, like Lobo Tiger, Brent Cook, and dozens more individuals who are actively putting cash to work in the mining equities industry. And so my ambition with this event always is that we start very high level and then we work top down to build our investment case. This year at the event, I expect about 8,000 investors to attend. We have about 250 companies presenting in the exhibit hall. And then around the exhibit hall, I have 5 stages where we stream content for 2 days straight. I think we're flying in about 80 keynote speakers. I mentioned a handful of them. There's many, many more. And so what you'll find on stage is like a wide variety of panel discussions, debates, fireside chats, and keynote speeches over the course of 2 days. vricmedia.com, or just for fun, you can go to goodbyejustin.com. And, a unique thing about this conference, Jesse, is like general admission is free. We're actually 100% sponsor supported. So we have amazing partners that help us build this conference. And as a result, we're able to keep general admission cost free. You do have to pre-register. You can't just show up. You will not be allowed in. But pre-register at vricmedia.com. Get yourself a ticket. That gets you access to everything, every stage, the trade show, all of it. And if you're a super keener and you want to take the next step and you want to meet Robert Kiyosaki or Danielle DiMartino Booth, Grant Williams, any of these individuals, Jesse Day, then buy yourself a VIP ticket. And the VIP ticket gets you front row seat in the speaker hall, best seats in the house. We'll host you for breakfast and lunches each day with special presentations just for you. And the most coveted ticket at the event, which is the keynote speaker's cocktail party at D6 Lounge at Park Casino. It's super fun. So all the speakers, all the keynotes will be at that party. And it's a great place because it's super exclusive. If you want to meet the individuals on the stage and have a drink, spill some wine with them, that's the place to do it. So check out a VIP ticket if you're a super keener.
Great. Well, I know people will enjoy typing goodbyejustin.com into their browser. So if you want to do that, go ahead. But I will also have a link below, a direct link to the tickets. Like Jay said, it's free if you're in the Vancouver area or you're keen and you want to travel in and see all these great speakers. Definitely do that. I will also put a link to the Jay Martin Show. Jay interviews a variety of incredible guests, many of which will be appearing at this year's VRIC. So check that out as well. Jay, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jesse. Great to see you.
And thank you for joining us. As a reminder, this episode is brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. For all your precious metals needs, head to arcsgo.com and contact owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.